You might have experienced this before, starting with a clear opinion. At first, you're pretty firm about it, almost certain in your thinking. But after talking with someone, you suddenly start feeling unsure. You even say something like, "Yeah, you might have a point." But here's the strange part. When you're alone again and everything quiets down, you suddenly feel like something was off inside. Not that they were wrong, and not that you lost the argument. It's more like the whole interaction just felt uncomfortable in a way you can't explain. Like your conclusion didn't come from your own thinking step by step, but was slowly guided in a direction without you noticing it. If you've ever felt that, then you really need to hear this. Because today, I'm going to break down 3 psychological patterns that happen every single day, but most people have no idea. 1. The subtle yes building pattern begins like this. Some people influence you in a very hidden way. They don't come in with strong opinions right away, and they don't directly disagree with you at first. Instead, they start with simple harmless questions pulling you into their rhythm. Like, have you been pretty tired lately? You don't really like being rushed either. We're all kind of in the same situation, aren't we? These questions don't feel aggressive at all. You don't even feel like you're being led, you just naturally nod along because, well, it feels true in that moment. But that's where the shift begins. After you've nodded a few times, your mental state subtly changes. You enter a kind of ongoing agreement mode, and in that state, people naturally try to stay consistent. In other words, you become less likely to suddenly switch into disagreement mode. So when the other person slowly introduces their real point, like, "So I think you should try doing it a different way," you'll notice your resistance has dropped. You might even think, "Yeah, that could work." But that acceptance didn't happen all at once. It was built on all those small moments of agreement before it. You weren't persuaded by one sentence. You were gradually guided there, through a rhythm of agreement building over time. This happens a lot in real life. For example, at work, someone who wants your help won't directly ask right away. They'll start by asking if you've been busy lately. If you've been under a lot of pressure, you say yes to keep the conversation going. Then they continue. "Everyone's been overwhelmed lately. There's so much going on everywhere right now." You keep nodding along by the time they ask, "Could you help me out?" It becomes harder to say no. Not because the request itself became more reasonable, because you've already been participating in a shared we all agree dynamic. Without realizing it, you've positioned yourself closer to agreement. 2. The question-based influence works even more subtly. This method is even more subtle. They don't tell you you're wrong, and they don't argue with you. They just keep asking questions like, "How did you come to that conclusion? Is it possible there are other factors? What if we look at it from another angle in this situation?" At first, you think this person is very rational and respectful. But over time, something changes. You start explaining yourself more, and more details get added into your reasoning. And in the process, your original position starts to loosen. You're not being overruled. You're dismantling your own certainty. Bit by bit, your confidence starts to fade. "Maybe I didn't consider everything in this situation." Eventually, you might even say, "Maybe I misunderstood it before." But what you don't realize is this shift didn't come from your own reflection. It was gradually shaped through a chain of guided questions. Because humans have a very typical bias, we don't like being told what to think. But we strongly trust conclusions. We believe we arrived at ourselves. When you're constantly answering questions and adjusting your logic, you're actually walking along a carefully shaped thought path. In real life, this shows up a lot in relationships too. When two people disagree, one person might not argue at all. They just ask why you think that way. You explain. They say they understand. Then ask what would happen if the situation were different. In this case, you keep explaining, and slowly you realize you're not as firm as you were at the beginning of the conversation. You start to waver, but there's no conflict the whole time. It feels like a calm, rational conversation, yet your position has quietly shifted. 3. The illusion of choice shows up almost every day. This happens almost every day in conversation. but you probably don't notice it. When you don't want to do something, they don't ask, do you want to do it? Do you want to do it now or later? Do you prefer option A or option B? Sounds normal, even respectful, right? But the key issue is this. The underlying assumption is already in place. You're going to do it. The only question is how. This is what's called the illusion of choice. People hate feeling controlled, but they love making a choice. So as long as you feel like you're choosing, your resistance goes down. Even if the options are already framed within a fixed boundary, you still feel like you made the decision yourself. But in reality, a lot of decisions are made exactly like this. Not through force, but through carefully defined choices that feel free. At this point, you might start feeling a bit uncomfortable, because you realize this isn't some distant concept. It's happening in everyday conversations. You may have even felt that subtle something's off feeling before, but you probably dismissed it as the other person being rational or overthinking. But in reality, your emotional reaction is often the most honest signal you have. You just tend to ignore it. And one final thing, none of these techniques are inherently bad. They're just part of how human communication works. The real difference is that some people use them to make communication smoother, while others use them to gradually influence your judgment. And the most important thing isn't whether other people know these methods. It's whether you can see them. Because when you don't recognize these patterns, it's easy to be guided by them. And once you do see them, you start to realize a lot of what seemed like complicated human behavior is actually just repeating psychological mechanisms. And maybe real freedom isn't about influencing others more. It's about not being so easily influenced yourself.